So our speaker today is Niyanta Shetye, and he is going to share with us some of the research that he has done on understanding Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, communicating climate change as it relates to capacity building and so forth. Niyanta is a student at a German university, which he can tell you more about, but he's also been an intern at the UNFCCC Secretariat. So I will hand it over to you, Niyanta.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hello, everyone. I'm Niyanta. So, okay, so not a student now, defended my thesis in March, so right before Corona lockdown. Now assisting my professor. So from the beginning, my area of interest was communicating climate change, is how different organizations and countries and different bodies are communicating climate change. But just to narrow it down, I just focused on Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And before we start off, I'll just give you a brief overview of the content. So of course, there is motivation. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I chose this particular article and not something other article in Paris Agreement. The elements of different of Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, my research target in the case of my thesis, the methodologies which I used, communicating climate change in a digital age. And this is something which I call it as the other side of the coin, which is far less explored in terms of climate negotiations, and my conclusions and recommendations, and then we can open up for discussion on whatever my research is and whatever you feel on it. So with regards to my motivation, my first motivation was this is the smallest article in the Paris Agreement, and I want to know what is done in the smallest article of the Paris Agreement. Obviously, it has a lot of similarities with the capacity building article, but again, it's very difficult to dissect the actions which are taken under Article 12 and make them separate from the rest of the article, because everything in the Paris Agreement is a cross-cutting issue. I wanted to take a holistic approach on implementation of this on this article, and not just stick with one of the elements, which is education or training or public awareness or public participation. And this was mainly, of course, my professor's recommendation that go with the entire article, since it's a small article. If there were sub-articles, then I would have focused or narrowed down on that particular thing. And I had communication and cross-cutting research tasks with both the UN Climate Change Secretariat and the United Nations University in Germany, Dresden. So considering my motivation, I just studied the entire elements of Article 12. So obviously education relates more to changing of habits. Education is something which is not specifically said should be only for children, but it should also be for adults, people of all ages, to change habits, to learn, as well as we need to also unlearn certain things, our way of consumption, our way of shopping, our way of changing gadgets every year. Training is, of course, more aimed towards global south and having more north-south and south-south cooperation. You have access to information, so access to environmental information can not only just lead to more awareness or participation, but it can also facilitate a way for environmental justice. And this is one of the main highlights of this article, where it connects more to the basic human rights, or the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, is having access to information, that government bodies need to give the proper information to public. Also, public awareness in terms of climate change is to reach out to people of all walks of life, not just specialist people, and having them to participate at a community level. And it is my understanding from my interactions at the UNFCCC that public participation was not just meant to be in terms of a demonstration or to be in terms of protest. It was also meant for community-led initiatives, community-led adaptation, and a more inclusive approach. And last but not the least, we cannot implement any of this without international cooperation. So together they form Article 12 of the Paris Agreement and climate change initiatives have been communicated through these six articles together. So in terms of my research target, my central question to this was, it's been 4 years since, so I started my thesis in 2019, so that's why the 4 years. So it's been 4 years since the Paris Agreement was in force, but what is the progress of work done in terms of Article 12 of the Paris Agreement? So what different initiatives have been taken by organizations under Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, which have a significant policy impact? So it's not just the initiative and number of budget and the money that's been spent, it's also what kind of policy impacts they had on the field or on national policies. What are countries doing to enhance Article 12 of the Paris Agreement? So there is a lot of talk about ways to enhance Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, but it's not just that the Secretariat has to enhance it. Countries also need to include it in their nationally determined contributions. Also, if my thesis was more in terms of Article 6 of the convention, then it has to be done in terms of the NAPs as well as the NAMAs, as well as the communication notes which are sent to the UNFCCC Secretariat. And last but not the least, to make the thesis more relevant to 2020. So has digitalization made climate change communication more effective and accessible in recent years? So this was a kind of question which I really wanted over there, and I had mixed opinions from both my first supervisor and my professor on this. In terms of methodology, considering my research target, I considered both primary data and secondary data. In terms of secondary data, I went back to studies that were conducted by IGOs, NGOs, research organizations, also documents and reports produced by UN agencies, different literature reviews, which were both academic and non-academic. In terms of primary data, I did quantitative as well as qualitative analysis. So my first analysis was of the nationally determined contributions, was to see how many countries have actually included Article 12 of the Paris Agreement in their nationally determined contributions. At the time of the thesis, there were 184 countries that had submitted their NDCs on UNFCCC's interim NDC portal. However, I did not go for a keyword analysis. I went for a sentence analysis, or as I call it. And an Excel sheet was completely maintained just to see, just to make it transparent. So if anybody requests that Excel sheet that we want to go and see the raw data of this NDC analysis, it should be made available to them. Sentences were captured and different elements were also recognized in that. And country analysis was done on the basis of UNFCCC's country sort of categorization, which is developed, least developing, so Annex 1 and non-Annex 1. The newest World Economics Prospect report was not considered in terms of country analysis because that's still not how the UNFCCC categorizes countries. Also in terms of primary data for digitalization, and if digitalization has an impact on climate communication, a primary study was done on the IPCC special report 1.5 degrees Celsius as to see how many media articles covered the IPCC SR 1.5, and this was done through a basic Google News search. And considering the fact that a lot of algorithm was under play, I could capture 132 news articles at that point. And most of the news articles came from US and Europe, and there were very few which I could capture from India and also from Africa. So this was the overall methodology of my research. And before we begin about Article 12, I just want to give you a quick overview of the conceptual history of environmental communications in general. Environmental communications, so climate communications has basically trickled down from environmental communications. And in my opinion, this dates back to 1972 Stockholm Declaration of Principle 19, where education was made a highlight in that particular principle. It also had a wonderful line which said that mass media should not be detrimental to environmental conservation effects. And that also is something which is applicable today. We see that some mass media and technology is kind of having a negative impact on the environment. So this statement, which was made in 1972, even is relevant today. Moving on from 1972, in 1992, when the Rio Declaration was signed, Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration focused more on environmental justice and having access to environmental justice. In 1992, also UNFCCC was signed by many countries, and in Article 6, that brought all the 6 elements together. It's also observed very similarly that in Article 19 of the UNCCD, capacity building, education, and public awareness are highlighted. So environmental, even other environmental agreements have these particular elements in them. In the Kyoto Protocol in 10E, again, public awareness, public participation has been mentioned. Also in the Aarhus Convention, which is more, which was done by UNCCD, it was more focused on public awareness, public participation, and access to environmental justice. And and it was highlighted that public bodies should give the relevant information, especially with regards to hazardous environmental impacts to the general public. In the Paris Agreement, again, it was reiterated, but this was a article which was kind of shortened from UNFCCC's Article 6. And it was put over there. As I've presented this thesis in the UNFCCC as well, and from what I heard after my presentation was this was the very first article which went out without any conflict. The major bottlenecks were finance, then you had loss and damage, and major articles where there were standoffs between least developed countries and developed countries. So this was the very first article that was a smooth go for the negotiations. Not only this, but also in the SDGs, our target 13.3 focuses on education to combat climate change, to build adaptive capacity to mitigate the effects of climate change. So overall, this is the brief overview of how from environmental communications, climate communications has evolved. However, considering the new development in technology, it still needs to evolve. In terms of the negotiation patterns, in COP18, the Doha Work Program was launched, and the Doha Work Program mainly focused on making this Article 12 of the Paris, Article 6 of the convention more relevant, and having to coordinate with different parties and regions, holding regional dialogues just to make sure that countries are implementing Article 6 of the convention properly, and also getting feedback from the countries. In COP21, Article 12 of the Paris Agreement came. In SB 44, the Doha Work Program went under review, where there were certain calls for submission. In SB 47, calls for submissions to improve the Doha Work Program under the Paris Agreement were met, and most of these calls came from G77 plus China, Uganda, you have Japan, South Korea, European Union, also UNGO. One of the things which I noticed during my research is that UNGO made a submission to improve the Doha Work Program after the review, and they failed to mention anything regarding digitalization, internet, social media, and this was in 2017. So that was a kind of a bummer for me that the youth constituency of UNFCCC has not yet mentioned these things. They also did an NDC analysis. However, their NDC analysis was keyword search NDC analysis. I think they have also mentioned a methodology in the submission portal, as well as they have shared their results on their website. Most of the main aim of that particular NDC analysis was to see how many times education is maintained or education is mentioned in the NDCs. And it was 63 times, but not all countries have made submissions in English. There are some countries which have made submissions in Spanish, French, Arabic, and that's why I chose to go for a sentence analysis, or translating the complete NDC and then seeing where these articles are mentioned. Another thing which I noticed when I was doing my NDC analysis is that some countries have printed out a PDF, then signed it, and then scanned it and uploaded it on the NDC portal of UNFCCC. And in such cases, the keyword search does not work. So that was a kind of that was one of the reasons why some of my results are different than Yungo's. Also, in SB 48, the draft proposal on Article 12 of a Paris Agreement was submitted along with a workshop. So a workshop was taken with different NGOs, mostly Mary Robinson Foundation, I think, was very active in this, and they focused on environmental justice and education. However, even during the workshop, there was not much mention of digitalization, internet, or social media, and how that is having impact on the whole article in itself. In COP24, a decision was adopted is to treat Article 12 of the Paris Agreement and Article 6 of the Convention as one. So the delegates that will be representing their countries in the convention for Article 6 will be the same delegates that will be responsible for Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. And that, in my opinion, that decision was kind of a late one, because for me, from the beginning, I could see that these two articles are very well connected, and having the same delegates to do this will create more synergies and will make the process more fluent and simpler. In SB 50, once again, Action for Climate Empowerment is under review. So Doha Work Program, also known as Action for Climate Empowerment. I think in SB 52, once again, they will have certain new terms of references for the Doha Work Program. I have not been following that negotiations very intensely. But this is the overall negotiations, and under the Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, there have been vague references to social media or targeted audience, so targeting audience, but the question is how. So which decision makers and policy makers need to figure out how do they target audiences. It can't be left open for interpretation. Or using social media, you can say it in decisions, or having some things regarding social media, but you need to be very, very specific on that particular thing. So this was my opinion on this. In terms of the initiatives which are taken by organizations, so my first supervisor and me selected quite a variety of initiatives, ranging not just with the UN, but also with some NGOs, which I found quite interesting. So Action for Climate Empowerment, of course, has the highest policy impact because it directly deals with countries, it directly deals with policymakers and different educational institutions that are present in the region. It also holds regional ACE dialogues, which are very effective. One of the things which I found about ACE is that even if they are dealing with so many things, they have failed to build synergies among the UN agencies which deal with internet. So for example, International Telecommunications Union, they don't have a partnership with them, or the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. That's a whole different universe in the UN system in itself. So there is a huge gap between that. I had a couple of interviews with the International Telecommunications Union. I didn't make it because it was an unpaid internship, so I could say no. But even after that, they said that they don't have any partnerships with the Convention of Biological Diversity, with UNCCD, or with UNFCCC. And all these three conventions have an article on education, training, public awareness, public participation. They have highlighted that environmental challenges cannot be dealt without public awareness and all these 6 elements. So that is one of the drawbacks of ACE, but otherwise I find this very highly policy impacting because it also has a temporal aspect to it. ACE is one of the oldest initiatives having to stayed under the convention, right from the New Delhi work program to the Doha work program, which is currently being developed. The second most policy impacting initiative by an organization is the One UN Climate Change Learning Partnership. This is UNCC Learn. And it not just deals with e-learning courses, but it also deals with country projects that are developed in least developing countries or developing countries. One of the things which I feel is a drawback of UN climate change partnership is that it's in direct competition with Udemy and Coursera, and it hasn't figured out a strategy to confront that. World Bank, which is one of the partners in UN climate change learning, is posting both on UNCC Learn's e-learning as well as Coursera. So they have realized what the competition is and how to surpass it. You have the UN Alliance on Climate Education Training Public Awareness. This is an informal alliance of UN agencies. Unfortunately, they don't have any website. They have not released, I would say, any information on how they wish to progress in the coming years. They don't have a mandate because it's an informal partnership, but you get to see events with them and with them every SBs and every COP. In terms of NGOs, I found climate outreach very impacting because they released an IPCC handbook on how to communicate climate change. So how to communicate climate change for IPCC authors. I think it's very relevant when IPCC authors are asked what climate change is to not to go in uncertainties, but to stick in, the more known areas. Also, CDCAN has developed climate communications handbook, and that is a shared knowledge amongst all climate communicators. And the best thing which I liked about this is they took feedback and they relaunched again. So that is one of the things. Fridays for Future, again, one of a very good initiative. However, unfortunately, I feel that it still needs time to grow as an initiative. It still needs time to nurture their momentum and then have a much more significant policy impact. And it's a much newer initiative, but the least policy impacting initiative which I found was the UN Act Now Bot. And in my opinion, this is also a little misleading because they make you use the UN Facebook chat, and you have to tell if you showered for 5 minutes or if you cycle to work, and then they count the actions, but there is no checks and balances for it. So you don't have to send photos of what you did, which actually matters. So anyone can just click whatever they want and that action is counted. For my perspective, the most impacting initiative was the ACE one and the UN Climate Change Learning Partnership, because it's a much more implementing arm of ACE. In terms of UN Climate Change Learning Partnership, I just saw how they had implemented a project in Benin. So Benin had a very clear vision of ensuring low emission development and resilient and building resilience to climate change. So developing a national climate change committee in the country, which also has UN entities, NGOs, governments, educational institutions, and civil society. They had to identify certain key priority areas. They had to submit a proposal, and based on that, they developed certain actions. Most of these actions were towards building institutional and individual capacities of people that are working in the ministries of environment, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Infrastructure of Benin. And this was a very good project to see in terms of the documents, because the entire documentation was done in French, but they had a lot of sections on how which of these actions were of key strategic priorities. The entire project cost around 16 million US dollars, but there was no progress report that was made accessible even during or after the time frame of the project. And for me, I literally ran behind people for this. So I had mailed the UN country coordinator. I asked UNCC Learn personally, please, if you have a progress report, I would like to have it as to see how $16.5 million were spent. So like exactly what did you do with that money? But unfortunately, it was not made available, even if on the website they mentioned that every year they're going to upload a progress report. So yes, I mean, in terms of implementation, I would personally have to get on a plane and go to Benin to see what has happened. So out of budget. Otherwise, just like Benin, there were a lot of countries which had intentions of having this particular article getting implemented through the Paris Agreement. There are a total of 109 countries. Most of them are developing countries. There are only 4 developed countries, and most of them are least developing and developing countries. So if you just see the map, you can see that the dots represent those countries which have Article 12 in their NDCs, and most of them are in the global south. So like countries that are highly impacted and vulnerable to climate change. So in Central America, Latin America, you have, okay, Canada is there, but then in Europe, you just have France, but they had submitted a separate NDC for their overseas territory. Then you have the major African countries, Asia, Pacific region. But if you see Europe, there's no mention of Article 12 of the Paris Agreement in their NDCs. It's more mitigation, and that's it. So that is the state of Article 12 in terms of negotiations and also in terms of implementation, just by seeing one country project, which was done by the implementing arm under Action for Climate Empowerment. Now let's talk about why we should consider having digitalization inside this particular agreement, this particular article. So why should digital transformation, digitalization, internet, social media be included in negotiations, workshop, and be rigorously discussed, not just left as an abstract thing. So most of the opportunities are very simple. There is a huge ton of emergence of e-learning platforms. Even my university, where I'm teaching, we have to do it via e-learning. This means that people need to have proper connection to internet. I need to have proper gadgets such as headphones or a good computer which will not crash. Access to instant information is made available, so you can access information even may it be from Wikipedia, or may it be from UNFCCC's websites, or may it be from a government body's website. There can be good public discourses, awareness and participation. So this is a kind of a public discourse that we are having, and we can only have it because of the digital advancements. Availability of data. So data can be mined, it can be analyzed, and it can be visualized. So these are the most important things which can revolutionize Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. But there are also disadvantages. So for example, affordability is one of the most, affordability of internet is one of the most, I would say, highest challenge in terms of internet. We get it over here for, let's say, the internet which I have is €1 per day, and my department pays for it. But in Africa, in other countries, I think it's much more costly, and not everyone can have that. For example, in small island states such as Fiji and Samoa, the internet is 5 times more than that of countries which are connected by land somewhere. So the countries which have the worst impacts of climate change also have to pay the highest cost to get connected with the world. And especially in Corona, when people are having high-level dialogues, it's hard for people living in Fiji, Samoa, and these regions to participate in them. Digital literacy more in low and middle income countries is kind of there. So lack of infrastructure, education, affordability, these are major barriers for digital literacy. So one of my uncle teaches in India in a village, and he cannot teach right now because his students are not digitally that savvy as I am, or they don't have a better connection. So obviously they get laid back. Broadband Commission has a target of boosting connectivity to 75% by 2025. However, as I have said this before, this is a different universe than UNFCCC Paris Agreement. There is huge digital gender divide. So 12% of 12% digital gender divide worldwide, and it's even more, which is 31% in LDCs. You have OECD, UNU, International Telecommunications Union, the UN Chair for Human Rights, USAID, Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, all working towards closing the digital gender divide. So what can be devised from this is that the people who bear the worst impacts of climate change, women, children, people living in small island states, people living in the least developed countries are the ones that are not connected by internet and cannot take part in digital platforms or high level dialogues, or cannot build their skills, cannot train in a digital manner, or cannot even get educated in the current scenario such as corona. So they are the ones who are more disconnected. So this is why we need to desperately consider having the aspect of digital transformation inside UN negotiations whenever there is education, training, public awareness, public participation. And just to make a convincing, much more convincing argument, I'll just tell you that very briefly that a digital outreach study was conducted on IPCC special report of 1.5 degrees global warming. It was to see how digital technologies have made IPCC report more accessible or not, what is the frequency and duration of this report. News articles only in English this time were covered, because by this time I was kind of burned out. A data set of 132 articles were considered. Specific perspectives were noted, and this was noted manually. So no automation. Sentiment analysis was done with a free sentiment analyzer with Daniel Soper. There were assumptions that news agencies will have an impact on home countries, so they won't have an impact abroad. This was an assumption which was made. However, one thing about this study is that it was completely hampered with Google's fantastic algorithms. So the computer that I was using had a bias towards US news agencies. So I saw that overall 60 of news articles were targeted towards the US. There were 10 in Germany, in Belgium 2, United Kingdom 5. I could see only 10 in India, 2 in China, and some in Japan and Philippines. Overall, in terms of the perspectives, I could see that mitigation was a major perspective, major key message, I would say, that was hit out through the IPCC's media outreach. Other perspective which considered, which took perspectives like, geoengineering or biodiversity or something like this were put in other categories, so there were also more. But overall, temperature rise was one of the easiest message to outreach from the IPCC special report. Most of the news that came was kind of negative, so in terms of sentiment, so like a depressing one, like, okay, we are dying, the world is ending kind of thing. But there were some that were also positive, so that we still have 12 years to act, we still have time to take action, and there were some which were neutral. Overall, in terms of time phrase, you see that the launch of report had the highest amount of news articles that were shot out. It was 34, and the next peak you can see is when Greta Thunberg addressed the US Congress on climate change on 17th of September 2019. So over a period of 1 year, it had quite an exciting life, the IPCC's media outreach. In terms of perspectives, 1.5 degree versus 2 degrees was only met in negative or positive. There was no neutral perspective to that. And in Twitter sphere, well, perspectives of news articles changed a lot. So there were more tweets and more shares on temperature rise. This was an easily communicated message from the IPCC special report. So my conclusions from my thesis is that ACE and UNCCC Learn are the most policy impacting initiatives, and UN ACNA bot has no policy impact and is completely misleading. If you have a chance to see what UN ACNA bot is, please go and see it. You will understand. Developing and least developing developed countries are focusing more on implementing this article through country-driven approaches and rapid and uneven digital transformation, more specifically in information and communication technologies, will have a major impact on how this article is being implemented at regional or local levels. It's also made climate change related news issues accessible to certain selected groups of people who have access to internet and ICTs, but the most vulnerable communities remain excluded when it comes to public discourses, public dialogues, education with regards to climate change. My recommendations are this: opportunities and challenges of communicating climate change in a digital age should be brought to existing platforms like ACE. There is no need to make a new platform for discussing this and waste UN money. Organizations like Alliance for Affordable Internet, International Telecommunications Union, Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development should be brought to ACE dialogues. I think they will have a great impact when talking in terms of ICTs and internet. UNCC Learn should partner with independent research organizations. All the UNCC Learn courses are completely developed by UN agencies. And they should definitely partner with independent research organizations, universities, development agencies for their e-learning course and online library. And also they should publish annual reports of their country projects, which I think is fair. The last, it's not a recommendation, but I do highly support the WGBU's charter on our common sustainable digital future and the Principle 19 of 1972 Stockholm Declaration, where it clearly says that mass media should not have a negative impact on the environment. This was said in 1972. I think this is still applicable now. So that's about it. Thank you very much for your attention.